Hi everyone, welcome to How to Product. This is the sixth episode, and we'll be doing this together with Gauher. And as you know, how we do it on this show, we talk about products, anything that concerns products, but not from a theoretical standpoint. We try to talk about it from an experiential, practical, very, very realistic standpoint, just so that you can get a sense of how this is applicable in reality, right? I always like to quote in principle versus in practice. So this is about how it applies in practice. And the topic we'll be addressing today is functional product design. With me here is Gauher J. Hi, Gauher.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. I hope I'm pronouncing your name the right way anyway.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for being on the show. It's an immense privilege to have you here to share your experience. I know you have lots of things to say when it comes to functional product design, and it is just overwhelming to have you here. But I think I'll be able to manage to the end. I wouldn't die. All right. So, without any further ado, would you mind telling us about yourself, like as a means of introduction?
Yeah. So I would say I currently work as a UX UI designer. I so mainly if I say UX, because UX is an acronym, I would clarify that UX is user experience and UI is user interface.
Right.
So a bit of background about myself. Then I studied design and media arts a long time ago in Pakistan in my university. So over there I learned subjects like communication design, print design, website design. So a bit of everything about different design fields. And that's how I got a very good foundation about like color theory, typography, and elements and principles of design, which I still use quite a lot. I
Right.
would say for anybody looking into newly starting, I would recommend learning about color theory, typography, and then elements and principles of design. These are the solid foundation that I still go by.
Yeah.
And then after my university, I started working in a software company in Pakistan. So over there, at that time, I was mainly doing the communication design side of things, but they were really keen for me to learn coding. So they had a big design team and then a very big development team, and they were making a lot of digital products for companies internationally and locally in Pakistan as well. So they were keen for me to learn coding, and they arranged trainings from colleagues. So I was very lucky to actually get some learning going. So, and they also made some practice tasks for me to practice in coding. So
Wow.
that was where I really got interested in UX and UI side of things, because understanding the infrastructure and the framework that goes into coding really helped me link the design with coding, because
Yeah.
otherwise if I wouldn't relate it, it would become harder for me to design for any like digital software or website. So I would say learning coding was a very good eye opener for me. And
Right.
also that's when I learned that developers, like software developers, were my very first user base. Because whatever I was designing, they were the first users to take my design and code it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it needed to be user friendly for them.
I haven't thought about it that way, but yeah, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah. So when I learned coding, then I was thinking from that point of view, how to keep it easy to develop, but then also looking okay. Because sometimes if design is looking very sparkly, but it's a very painful thing to develop, that's not very a good
Yeah.
experience for the developers.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I started picking more UX and UI side of designs, and then also coding the designs that I was making. So,
Mm.
and then I also got into teaching. So I started teaching outside my work role. So I would get quite a few students and I would teach them design and UX. So that's mainly it from my background point of view. Also, then I kept switching jobs and moved to the UK and
Mhm.
kept working in the UX field.
Wow, that's quite an experience you've gathered over the years. You know, the interesting thing you said that really struck me is the fact that you started looking from the developer's point of view. We have lots of designers who just, yeah, this is good for our users, but try to focus on the users without even considering how the developers would experience the design and try to implement this design. But what you've said really opens that box for me because I've never even thought about it. I think I would have also sidelined the developers and focused strictly on the users. I would ask you some questions around that as we go along,
Yeah.
but I was going to throw a curveball at you. So, aside from teaching and working in your role as a designer, what else do you do as a fun fact or hobby or something?
Mm, So I quite like watching TV series,
Ah,
and mainly on Netflix. I also read books. I like to crochet,
hmm.
and I like going to the gym. I think that's pretty much it.
That's a lot. To be fair, crocheting is something that I think relaxes the nerves and gives you a way to to avoid screens. So it's a good thing, I guess. I should learn something that takes me away from the screens anyway.
I recommend crocheting. It's really fun. It gives an outlet to use the creative energy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that's amazing. So, now you've talked in a brief way of introducing and touching on the different things that you've actually done to get to this point, right? I just want you to sort of expound on what was your turning point? At what point did you pick the interest to become a designer, or was it just random trajectory and you found yourself here, or was there a deliberate path that you decided that okay, I'll learn this, I'll do that, and then I'll become this? At what point did you make that decision to become a designer? And if that was early on, how did you sort of manage your way to get here?
I would say it was quite organic. I didn't actually plan for quite a lot of things, although quite a lot of things are planned. But if I go quite long ago, I was always a very artistic person. So I used to enjoy drawing and designing like on a paper. And then so I really wanted to study fine art
Mm,
because I wanted to paint and draw. But in Pakistan, in the city that I was living in, they didn't offer a fine art degree that I could afford. So
wow.
the degree that I could afford was the closest one was a design and media art degree. That's how I got into the design degree. And I really liked it. And then even after my university, I wanted to stick with the mainstream design, which was mainly the communication side of design. And
Mm,
then when I started working, then once I started learning the coding, then I got really interested into the UX side. So that's how organically I moved into the UX and while
okay.
still doing the communication design. And then yeah, started making a lot of website and applications. So I would say there wasn't a point that I thought, okay, this is where I want to go, but it just organically happened and the circumstances kept changing and it paved
Yeah.
a way for me to end up where I ended up today.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean that sounds like the story for a lot of us. We sort of started from one thing and then one thing led to another, and here we are doing what we're doing and we love what we're doing. But yeah, you've mentioned a couple of things like communication design, UI, UX. Let's start with communication design. What would you say that is, communication design? And if you can, maybe say what communication design is painted to be in principle, in theory, and then what you did as a communication designer. That would go a really long way to help our audience.
So, in terms of communication design is also quite broad. So it depends where the person is looking at it from, because some company say communications design is only about creating brochures or business card or
Mm,
social media posts. But in some companies, it is a lot more expanded that any design that is communicating something to the user is
mm,
called within communication design. So it depends company to company. But if I have to say, then there is the side of design that you do for social media, like posting on different platforms. Then there is a side that you do for print, like
mm,
any poster type of things. And then there is a side that you do websites and applications. So all of these designs, the key aspect is the user. If
mm,
be it communication design or UX, if it's not conveying, if it's not communicating the information that you want them to take away, it's just not doing its job very well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
Hence
same
the word communication, right?
Exactly. So even if it's a poster and or a website, yeah, it needs to communicate it correctly what it's trying to tell to the user. Otherwise, it's just because even on social media, looking through an Instagram feed, it's a very brief amount of time that you spend on there. So it's very short time that you have to convey your information to the user and
Mm,
something that stands out and is memorable for them to remember whilst there is so many posts that they are looking through. So it's yeah, always keeping the user need at the center of the work. It goes the same for both comms and for UX.
right. So for comms now, I assume there's a huge focus on the attention span of people and the fact that a lot of information alongside what you are communicating is coming at your user. So how do you ensure that yours stands out and is memorable, remembered by the intended users? I mean, that's a difficult thing to do.
Difficult, but it involves a lot of user research though. If
Mm,
even if it's comms, you have to understand what is your target audience. Not every design material works for every type of audience, and that's the same way for like websites. But if we just talk about comms, you need, if it's a scientific exhibition, you need and you are displaying a scientific poster, you need to understand what type of audience is coming to see that poster and also what information you are conveying, but
mm,
what the audience would be interested in seeing, because
yeah.
you can say anything, but if the audience is not interested in that specific topic, then it's just not going to go well. So you need to find that balance. So it
Mm,
requires quite a bit of user research and understanding your user base. Also, the attention span, like you mentioned. So if it's for social media or for websites, then all of the attention span is extremely important because it's very competitive. And
mm-hmm.
you need to know if it's Instagram, how is the user's attention span, what are the competitive posts. Yes, competitive analysis is very important, that I do all the time.
Wow.
Keeping an eye on where the competitors are, what they are doing, and then just keeping your designs as compared to the competitor, it really helps. And then which posts of the competitors are performing well, and that's how you can benchmark, okay, where I need to aim.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. So it gives you a sense of what people are more interested in or how people are reacting to what kind of posts from your competitors, and so you could now use that as a as an entry point, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
Ah, okay.
definitely. There's also like certain colors that, again, as I mentioned, color theory and typography. So colors, certain colors that are associated with certain markets For example, if it's healthcare, there's a usual set of colors that the companies use because they are the popular ones being used in healthcare sector. The same with education, or like a nursery school. You would expect quite a different set of colors being used there as compared to the healthcare or agriculture. So it also depends what the topic is. Then you can choose your colors accordingly. Not every color performs the same in a different industry.
Wow. That's serious. That's serious stuff right there. But yeah, before we go too deep into the communication side, I think this leads us nicely into the UI. You've been mentioning a lot about UI, and so if you could talk about UI, what it means, and maybe tie it nicely with communication design, that would be very helpful.
So from UI is actually the user interface that the user sees on their screen, either on the computer or on TV. If they're using Netflix on TV, then the screen they see, or the phone, any screen size, whatever design they see on the screen is what we would say the UI. And so if I would give an example of the functional design and how UI can be different depending on if we are considering accessibility and any inclusivity in your design. So I'll give an example. For example, if it's so apart from the UI, if it's a general life example, if you are on a pedestrian crossing, and a user, the person who wants to cross the road, so they press the button, and then the traffic sees a red light, and then the crossing person sees a green person, the light turn green. Then that's an indication that they need to cross. So it makes it a bit easier when they know, okay, this light has turned green, and then they can cross. So if you imagine a pedestrian crossing where the light turned red for the cars, but then you don't see the green person. So you can judge by the light and the red light and the car stopping that, okay, maybe this is the time for me to cross. But seeing the green indication makes it a lot easier, and it gives confidence that, okay, certainly now I need to cross. In different types of crossings, you would also see when the green light comes on, there's a counter of how many seconds it's left for you to cross the road. And that sets some expectation, okay, this amount of time I need to cross, rather than guessing. And then in another crossings, you would see a sound when the signal turns on, and then you hear a sound, and that's keeping the accessibility point of view, that if somebody is not seeing the light, then they can go by the sound or the pattern on the road, the dotted pattern. That's how you know, okay, this is where I need to cross. So it's quite a lot of inclusivity things and accessibility things, one top of another, that is developed for the user. And also it adds, if you see, having a button to cross the crossing adds value to the business, the traffic company or whoever the business is. It adds value because there is a valid use case, only then the signal is coming on for the crossing, and not just automatically after a few seconds. It's not doing that. So it saves a lot of power, a lot of time, that only when there's a user actually who wants to cross the road, they press the button and then it comes on. So it adds value to the business. It also, having a signal light, adds value to the user. So quite a lot of considerations.
That makes a lot of sense.
The same way, I would say in UI, if you want to add, like for example, on a page, when you see the terms and conditions or cookie use, you see two buttons. So if you want to add, like, okay, I agree type of button and I disagree type of button. So instead of adding one green button and one red button, you could have text on it. Okay, I agree, I disagree. A green button, I agree, and a red button, I disagree. You could also have an icon that makes it quicker to process if somebody is not reading it. You can have a tick icon and I agree, and then a cross icon and I disagree, with also colors. And then in the code you can have the text as well. If somebody is using a voice recognition or a voice command, then they would also hear, okay, I agree and I disagree. So you would give quite a lot of support for accessibility instead of having just the green and red button and not seeing anything, because not everybody might be seeing those colors or might be seeing the page itself. So I would say
Wow.
that's where I see the functional design coming in.
Wow. So functional design in UI has to do with the inclusivity and accessibility of the user interface, the interaction of the user with your nicely whipped up interface. And that makes a lot of sense because in traffic crossings or pedestrian crossings, I think, like you rightly mentioned, some of them have those beeping sounds,
Mm-hmm.
which sometimes I find it annoying.
Yeah.
But at some point, yeah, so I would even think, okay, maybe this is just for the blind people that are blind, so that they'll have a cue to know when to cross. But at some point, I can be incapacitated to even know. Maybe I'm the for some reason visibility is very poor, or for some reason I'm distracted looking at my phone. At that point, I am blind to the crossing because my focus is on
Yeah.
my phone. And so even when it turns green, I cannot know. If it is already counting down, I cannot even tell. But that sound will be like a cue to me to say, now is the time to cross. And I think that's very important because in design, like you've mentioned, some people might just sideline a particular sector or sect of people or users, which is important which is why it is important for people to do user research to understand their target audience. You could say, oh yeah, this solution is not for the disabled, it's not for the blind, it's not for anybody, it's just for people that can see.
Yeah.
And forgetting that 20% of the time, the people that have sight are possibly going to be incapacitated to see things. So they may be distracted, the lights may even stop working, it may be malfunctioning, visibility may be very poor, and they need that cue, which is meant for the blind, to also cue them in to taking an action that you want them to take. I think that's very, very, very key. And thank you very much for even mentioning that.
You highlighted a very good point. That's very correct. Yeah, it's so important to keep in mind that accessibility is actually for everyone.
Yeah.
Not keeping a particular audience in mind. It can be quite a lot of people fitting in the same shoe, and they might not be seeing that cue. That's a very good point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the last thing would be the user experience side of things. How does that fit into the communication design? How does that fit into the user interface design? And then capping it up with functional product design. So user experience, let's hear you.
So, so how I see it, if it's user interface design, it has quite a lot of design input, but you need to have user experience sorted, because doing just UI design may not be communicating the exact same thing you want to communicate if you haven't worked on the user experience, how the flow would be. If I give you an example, that if for example Netflix, so if you want to log in on Netflix and you have, so it looks good, it is it has its everything that it needs to say, it's easy to use, you enter your email and your password, you click the login button, and then it shows you a spinner for quite a while, and then it shows you an error that, oh, our server is down, please try again later.
Oh God, I hate those times.
Right? So it's giving a bad user experience, even though the design looked good. The designer did the best to do, but in the end the user experience wasn't what you wanted. So it's bigger than, user experience is bigger than just the design. it is quite a big thing. The whole product team and quite a big team is working to make the user experience good for the user, not just the UX designer, because they did everything they could on the login page and it looked okay. It was easy to use, but in the end, the experience wasn't good.
Mm,
So it's quite broad, and to communicate the exact message you want to communicate, that oh, we are a fast loading streaming website, it's not
mm.
going across because somewhere the user experience wasn't as good. So
Wow. So from what you're saying, it sounds like a collective effort of like product team or something.
it is a collective effort. From where I see it, I think it's one of the misconceptions as well that UX is being worked on by the UX designer, because
Mm,
UX is quite a broad thing. It's a user experience, how user friendly anything is to use, and it can't be done by one person or one team. It is from where I see it, I see it's the whole product team that works in some capacity for UX, be
mm,
it product manager or a developer. Everyone works on either from user research point of view or even for coding, how smooth the code is, how not buggy the code is, because if
yeah.
the website keeps hanging up, it's not going to give a good user experience. And from QA testing point of view, so it's the whole team that works on giving a good user experience. And certainly the design, that's where the UI design comes in. So you make a design that is so intuitive and
Mm,
work out how the user would want to use this product, and you work out all the flow. Okay, from this point they would want to use this, and that's where your user research comes in. So you talk to the user to figure out, not just guessing it. You can make quite a lot of assumptions, but it's good to get those assumptions clarified with user research and then make something, rather than make something and that not working. So UI does play quite a big part in UX, but
mm.
UX, where I see, is quite broad.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. Two major things that stood out is I've always assumed that user experience is mostly for the user experience designer and maybe a few people in the product team,
Mm.
right? But what you're saying here even transverses to the QA, to different aspects of the team that contributes to the product delivery, which is very key. And because it gives a broadened perspective as to what kind of experience people are feeling. Even being a stakeholder in the product delivery, you could tell where the experiences are lacking, aside from getting, of course, empirical evidences that tell you that, oh, the users are really, really struggling with this bit of your product. But getting more people's input sort of broadens that perspective. And I really loved that you said that. And then the other side is UI playing a big part in user experience, that is the user interface, what people see. You know, there's this saying about the brain understands things more visually. So if I say cat, if I say the word cat, CAT, what comes to your head, firstly, I can be so sure, is that you did not see the word CAT. It's a visual representative of a cat. It's an image, a picture, or a memory of a cat that you've seen. So having said that, UI is like the baseline towards establishing a UX. But now there's this thing I've noticed, and I want to get your honest opinion here. Of course, we are being pragmatic. You mentioned something around cookies, acceptance and rejection, and confirm my choices, save my preference. You would assume that the call to action for confirm my choices, like you mentioned, it's usually like red and green. Red always meaning what is not good. Green meaning, yeah, something that is good. So accept would be like green, reject would be red or something. Now, there are two things I've noticed recently. Some people twist the narrative. They could put accept as red, reject as green. So, and then there are some that instead of even switching that color scheme, what they do is Usually if you want something to be the call to action, from our understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to pronounce that button. So if you want people to click buy now on an e-commerce website, you make it big, you make it more, maybe a warm color texture or something that makes people feel comfortable about it and clicking. They wouldn't miss it. And if you want them to click on continue later or save to cart, you make that a bit grayed out so that it is less pronounced, less prominent. So you're sort of directing them towards a particular action point. And this same thing applies in accepting or rejecting cookies. These days, you see some of them, the accept cookie is what is very broad. And of course, some people, generally, I wouldn't want to accept cookie, or you're trying to stop an ad, and the adverts, you just have some tiny X button somewhere. What would you say about such kind of things? Because personally, I feel like it is not very ethical, because you want to, give people options that are not leaning towards something that you think, because nobody would really want you to collect their data. That's my assumption. If I don't want you to collect my data or track what I'm doing on the website, then if you're giving me the option to accept or reject, they should carry the same weight, or I don't have to click 2 times for me to reject you taking cookies. I don't have to look for the great option, which is to reject you taking cookies. I don't know if I've made my point clear.
Yeah.
It's just something that baffled me for a while now, and I thought, you being in that field, you could just speak to it. I'm sure a lot of people are also having similar concerns, like, why does it have to be so difficult to cancel out an advert or to reject cookies?
I understand your question. So from my point of view, if the world is an ideal place, yes, I would say, they need to be balanced. And sometimes there's this checkbox of newsletters that really annoys me, where sometimes it says, oh, tick here if you want to opt out, or tick here if you want to stay in, and it's always different depending on the company, and it really annoys me. But in an ideal world, it should be the same everywhere. But what I would say is, from my experience working in design, it comes a lot from the business value thing. So it's the business giving the guideline, okay, we definitely need it. And the designer, and the brief for the designer is, this is what we need to emphasize, and we always want to collect these cookies. Give me a design for that. And the designer feeling all they expressing their views, but it usually comes from the business value. If they really need something, then yes, designer is going to listen to that. Because from a designer's point of view, you see both the points. You also see the user's point, where you need to keep the user's needs at the top, and then you also have to balance it out with the company values and what the company wants. So it's sometimes a hard balance. And if it's a business requirement, then you do the research and you see, where can I make the compromise, and then you try to keep both the parties happy. So sometimes it's really tricky, but if I see, these buttons are bigger on purpose, then I do see it's coming from a business requirement.
Yeah, but it's painful, isn't it? It's like, so you're getting your business value at the detriment of the actual comfort of your users, in a sense. That's how I feel, because I don't feel very comforting when I'm interacting with a particular website, and the process of rejecting cookie is so difficult. You have to click like 3 times. You have to maybe click on choose my preferences, but accept is just one go. You can click accept, and then there's no reject. You have to look at what is the other option. So you see options of preferences, then you click on that, and then you toggle. Usually you have these toggles that says on, off, so you have to, and everything is conveniently marked as on, so you have to click each of those toggles to put them off and save your preference. That's like more than 4 clicks, and I know that there's a 3-click rule, but you click on more options, you toggle all the ones you don't want, and then you click on save preference before you can continue accessing the value on that page. Why does it have to be that difficult? I mean,
I agree. It's sometimes really annoying. And I would actually link this point to another point, another misconception that that is quite common that people I have heard this a lot that this design is easy and design takes very quick. And to some extent, yeah, I would say you can make a quick design, but it wouldn't always be a good design. So you can quickly make something, but it takes quite a lot of work and thinking, brainstorming, researching, and then designing. It takes quite a lot of work to get to a good design that works for the user and for the business, that
Mm.
balance again. So it
Yeah.
takes quite a while to reach that balance, and it is time consuming. But yeah, I have noticed it a lot that in quite a lot of companies where designers are given not that much value because they are sitting at the bottom, and yeah, this
Hmm.
will be quick, and that's they're not estimating time for the design when actually you do a because if you get a very little amount of time to do something, yeah, I would do it, but then it just would be as much time I got. And then you develop it, and then if it doesn't perform well, then people say, oh no, that it wasn't designed well. But then you also have to evaluate how much time you assign to the design. So it's sometimes very challenging, and you constantly have to advocate for no design needs to how UX adds value. So
Yeah.
sometimes you really need to advocate for that. And yeah, I would agree, like in, like for example, approve and I agree, I disagree type of situations.
Mm.
Even that could take quite long if you are stuck in a situation where a company asks you to do something but the
Yeah.
users don't want it. So how do you find that balance?
I
And
mean, that should be the whole point of human-centered design or human user-centered design. And we keep throwing these words around, and this is me being very practical. We throw these words around that, oh, we are being user-centric, we are being human-centered. But in the end, it's like you've got management telling you that this is what we want as our business value, our business objective, and you need to get it done. And so this will lead me very nicely into my next question of what sort of challenges have you faced on your path to becoming a designer, even like in your experience? What sort of challenges have you faced, and how did you even manage your way navigating through them and getting to this point where you are?
yeah, so I think I have already covered quite a few challenges already, where, for example, designers not giving enough value,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes hard because if you're in a company and you have a small design team, or even a bigger design team, but it's sometimes very challenging to um, explain the designs to people who don't understand the design process, because obviously people come from different fields and not everybody understands the process, and it's sometimes challenging to explain and how it's not just a quick change or just do this, and it doesn't just work like that. There's a whole process involved. You
Mm.
can't just make a button small. You need, if it's bigger for a reason, it's bigger. Why it's bigger? If you need to make it small, that's fine, but it might have some impact on something. So it always requires some sort of background work in
Mm.
either talking to someone or just explaining it to someone that okay, why it wouldn't work. So that I would say that would be the biggest challenge that I have in the years I have just learned to always advocate for why are we doing this design and why is it important, because a
Mm.
lot of the times people don't understand the value of design. They quite underestimate it, and it's in recent years it has improved a lot. Now companies really understand the importance of user experience and what a value it adds, but not every company. So it's very challenging to explain where the company doesn't know how important design is, and they've hired like a design team just as a tick box to have a
Mm.
design team in the team, but not actually understanding what value it's adding. So that's where it gets a bit challenging. But I would say keep advocating. Keep
Yeah.
it out.
Keep being
Say,
the voice.
yes.
I know you also touched on some misconceptions. I was wondering if there are any others that have come to mind
Um,
that you want to talk about, because yeah, there are lots of misconceptions, and people
yeah,
just have assumptions around design.
yeah. I let me think. So what other misconceptions are there? Um, from no, I think I'll answer a bit late. I can't.
Okay,
I've
no,
got
no
a bit
worries.
of brain freeze.
No, because I know you mentioned a few, so I should have just honed into that. But yeah, it's fine. So as we are winding down, would you mind, in a nutshell, just touching on what you think functional design is, especially when it comes to product design, and how you've managed to apply that in your current role, in your previous roles? Yeah, just to give an overview of what you think functional product design is and how you apply that.
So from my roles, I see functional design is where UX is plays a more important part than UI. So UX sits above, which is you spend quite a lot of time doing the user research, you understand your user base, you understand your business requirements, and you work out the flow, how functional it would be for user to use, and
Mm,
then you spend uh, the rest of the time doing an interface, but always keeping the user experience at the center of your work. So if there is any um, if it's not user friendly, it the design, then it just don't go with that design.
mm,
That's how I see the functional design. That if it's not working for the user, no matter how sparkly it looks, or like, again, going back to the crossing, no matter how glittery the
mm,
crossing would be, how many sparkles it would have, but if it's not doing the basic job of giving a button, or if it's a like button type of crossing, or just giving some sort of cue to the user to cross the road, then it may not be doing it that well.
wow, wow. Yeah, that sounds really amazing, because as a product manager, this is one thing that I have always put in the forefront. How do people feel at the end of the day? It is not how sophisticated your product is, it's not how much
Yeah.
features you've put in there. It is about how they feel. Are they feeling like their problems are being solved? Are they feeling like their jobs are being done? Are they feeling like their pains are being relieved, right? So that's why we have the empathy map, looking at value proposition canvases, just so that we understand exactly what the users are expecting and meeting them exactly at that point. And that applies to what you've just said, putting the user experience above and beyond the user interface. It doesn't matter how shiny it is. I've seen some very horrible looking websites that are doing amazingly well,
Yeah,
because
I
you would
know.
expect them to put in carousels, put in animations and transitions, and I mean, keeping it simple, like the law of Pragnan's in Gestalt's principle is like the key, because you help them do what they need to get done in the most efficient way possible without any much distractions. And I just love that you've managed to coin it that way, in terms of putting user experience above user interface, and of course a lot of things go into establishing the user experience, like the research you mentioned and all that. So thank you very much for that was very on point.
I'll add another point on here as well. When you mentioned about the website that not looking good but performing really good. So I will link that to another point, that because the UI trend changed very quickly as well. Sometimes when you make a website in 2005, and then in 2025 that website looks really outdated, But because it has been performing really well at that time, in 2005 it was looking good, and then it was performing well and it's still performing well, it's not always valuable to change the design drastically just to match
Mm,
market trends when the user are used to using that product in a certain way. So
true.
sometimes it's very valuable to stick with the experience that they are already used to rather
Yeah.
than making a drastic change. It also depends. if if for some websites a change works, but sometimes, at least for me, I get annoyed when a website does a complete redesign and then I
Mm,
don't find the things that I was used to doing. For example,
yeah.
if Amazon would do a complete redesign, then I would be a bit annoyed. It would take me longer to find
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So
That's
that's
true.
important.
That's very true. And I love that you even mentioned that, because I've not even really thought about why some of these websites take a long time to before you start seeing. There's no complete overhaul overnight. They take a they take an incremental progression to keep improving on their UI. Only places that are even relevant. There are places that you probably don't even need to make any change on the UI if the delivery of value is being met. I mean, who wants to change anything just because it doesn't look appealing to them? But yeah, I think that that is a very key point. So I think this is my last question. Do you have any advice that you would tell yourself 10 years ago? And the flip side of that is, what advice would you give to somebody who is just getting started or is an enthusiast? They just love the whole concept of product design, software design, and all that, and they feel, okay, I want to get started. Where do they start from? What should they look out for? What kind of resources should they leverage? What kind of experiences should they look for? Advice generally that can help somebody get started and stay consistent.
So I'll start with the advice I would give myself 10
Mm,
years ago. So I would have said I should have upskilled more. I think in the market, especially for UX and UI, it's very important to constantly stay upskilled and constantly be on top of the game, what's going on in the market, because all the platforms change so quickly. Design trends change very quickly. How the people are used to using other website changes very quickly. Like for example, if Google changes their designs, and if any people that are used to using Google would start using it in the new design way, and then if your product is something that the Google user base uses, then you need to keep factor that in, that okay, this is now the new Google user
yep,
experience, and then
yep,
you would try to bring in some consistencies with that, so it's easier for your user base to adapt to the Google standard way of working. So it's, I would say, yeah, quite a lot of, if I would have known earlier, I would have done more upskilling, I would have done more research. So now I join like LinkedIn groups. I That's the advice I would give to the new people as well, that try to find new LinkedIn groups or follow the people that you think post relevant articles related to UX or UI or related to trends or what type of tools you should use, because even tools change very quickly. Sometimes one tool is very popular, then after a few years there is this completely other tool that hits the market. So
yep,
it's very important to stay updated on all this type of, and also like coding technology. So you should, even though if you don't have knowledge on coding, but you would have some sort of knowledge of what is there available, like what type of languages are being used. So that, just that type of high level knowledge is very useful to have. And I would say um, the courses have been really helpful. So I always go to LinkedIn Learning and Udemy. Udemy is amazing. So always look out for the sale. Whenever they have quite a lot of sales going on. So I always go to Udemy and take the courses when they have the discount going on. So that's Udemy. I really like it. And YouTube, which is free. And there's so many helpful resources on YouTube if you want to learn, if you want to get into UX and UI type of thing. YouTube is great. and uh, even any social media website that you watch, just see the relevant things, the relevant type of articles if you can find, and even any apps that you use. So that's something that I do as well. Whichever apps or websites that I use day to day, I observe their UI very carefully, like where the icons are. And for example, even if it's a Google document, I see that where the buttons are on the page, and where the slider, how the slider looks like, and how their sidebar looks like. So just observing these things on everyday website makes a lot of difference, because then if I know, then sometimes in the future, if I want to design a scroll bar, I would have quite a lot of inspirations already in my mind.
Right.
Then you
Yeah.
can still do the research, always do the research, but at least if you're used to seeing, observing things more carefully, then you already have a set of library in your head back there,
Mm.
and then it's easier to come up with ideas. And then another thing that I would add, um, for anyone newly wanting to get, so um, if you are already working in a company, where not necessarily design role but any
Mm.
other role, but you want to get into design, then I would say have a look at who is doing the UX and UI work in your company currently, and try and go talk to them and on what type of work they do, and try to learn that. And if they can give you any tips, if they can volunteer for tasks. So I've done that in the past, where I went to the departments that I wanted to get into, and I've asked them to give me voluntary tasks to do. So it's good for them because they are getting their work done, and it's good for me because I'm getting something to build up my portfolio. So
True.
it's very helpful, because it's hard to find jobs with an blank portfolio. So in order to build your portfolio, you can volunteer in your current company to do some design work, or you can find some other companies. For I used to do this as well. I used to volunteer for design in charities. So they would do events, and for event promoting, they would want a website or they would want flyers. So you could go to the different charities or different companies. People would accept voluntary work. A lot of people accept voluntary work. So if
Yeah.
you're willing to do voluntary work, that would help you build your portfolio. And that's how you can get in your career for a UX and UI role.
Wow, fantastic. That's a lot of things. I wouldn't even try to unpack what you said there. But yeah, I also do accept volunteering work. If you're feeling very generous for design, I would gladly welcome you on board. So yes, thank you very much for all you said. I mean, there are lots of things I would have loved to touch and discuss about with you, Guaher, like the forecasts of what would happen in the future in design, what you think it is, how does design thinking fit into this? And I think we probably would come to touch on this in
Yeah.
sometime in the future. Yeah.
I would quickly add another thing as well, that you could, if you're wanting to learn design, then yeah, it's also good to find an instructor if that is possible, if that you can afford. There are also instructors who would be willing to teach you for free as well. If you find people on LinkedIn, message them, oh, I'm interested in learning this. Would you be able to guide me? How do I start? And that way you could also find knowledge there. So there's quite a lot of ways you can get into learning.
Wow. Okay. I hope you're also open to to instructing
Yeah,
people and teaching
definitely.
them.
Definitely. Yeah, always feel free to message on LinkedIn. I would love to teach.
Fantastic. There you go, guys. Gauher has generously offered herself to be your instructor on design, and I think you would not want to miss that opportunity. So please go on to LinkedIn, search for her name, as you can see, and give her a follow, message her, and tell her you want to learn about design, or whatever you want to learn about in the design space from her, and I'm sure she will be obliged to attend to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. That's an amazing talk you've given. That's amazing perspectives you've brought to all of what I had to ask. And thank you very much for listening, guys. And I would advise that you follow Guaher to also of course, see what she does in design. If you've got more questions you want to ask, you put them in the chat section or in the comment section of wherever you're listening from, or reach out to Gauher directly on LinkedIn. And either ways, you would get responses as quickly as possible. And if you've not subscribed to the channel on YouTube, on audio podcast platforms, please hit the subscribe button so that more of such content coming your way would get to you as quickly as possible. And so, on this note, I want to thank you very much, Goha, for
Yeah.
being very generous. I know we've gone over time. Thank you very much for being here, for sharing your perspective. And I hope we get to extend this conversation a little bit more in the nearest future, because I think there's a lot that needs to be said about product design and how it is done in the industry and how it is even done the right way. And so, yes, thank you very much for being here.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, for listening, and listening up to this point. I wish you a fantastic rest of your day.